Right, I just want to give a very short video, and I don't really know what you want to class this as, whether you want to think of it as an unprecedented sort of thought, because I don't usually do just MMA videos on things that happen. It's usually only predictions or recaps. Or if you want to think of it as a sort of recap video for one of the predictions in brief project videos that I did recently, which I don't usually do. So it depends on what you really want to think of it as. This is really about, not just about what happened this weekend within the MMA community, but really it's also about something that I've been saying for a bit that I feel vindicated over now. Firstly, I don't think that people should take anything away from Fedor in terms of his loss in perspective to his whole career. I think there was a big mystique that grew up around Fedor, and that happens in sports, and he really is the first person to be thought of as sort of beyond human in terms of being unable, nobody is able to beat him sort of thing, no matter how good they are. And he became put in his own little box, sort of as a demigod really above mixed martial arts, and there were, the mixed martial arts greats, and then there was Fedor, and nobody could touch Fedor. And of course, when Pride collapsed, I think he's fought less, and I think he's also fought in different places, and I think anything like that can have an effect on his career. And people are saying, Dan Henderson was much older and yet still beat him, so obviously Fedor was crap all along. No, I don't think so. However, I do think that it's Fedor that's lost a lot recently, rather than the fact that he's just moved to the UFC and found that the fighters are better. I don't actually believe that particularly. I think they're very good, but I don't think that the UFC fighters were suddenly always a breed above Pride fighters, and therefore no wonder this happens when he comes towards the UFC type fighters. Let's also have a look at the fact that the two people to have beaten him have sort of been rejected really from the UFC as not being good enough for that competition, and then they go ahead and beat Fedor. So I don't know what that says maybe about the UFC if you want to take the approach that the sort of old Pride versus UFC war that went around a little bit ago. For me, it's interesting that Dan Henderson won, and also the method he won, because I've always said, and I've been laughed at and a bit scorned for this, that I thought that Dan Henderson would and could beat Silva in a title rematch. And the reason I think that is because if you remember back, he was doing very well to begin with. The spider got him down to the floor, but he was still punching, and had he not made a mistake, I don't think he would have been submitted. And what I find interesting is that he's sort of employed the same type of thing for the Fedor match, and it was a case of Fedor actually stood with him rather than taking him down. But I think the same sort of thing would have occurred. I think that is what could have happened, and what would have happened maybe on a rerun of the Anderson Silva Dan Henderson match. So I do feel a little bit vindicated, not only with the speed and the quickness, but also the method in which Dan Henderson won. So there we are. The whole thing is quite interesting, really, because of course when this was first thought up, Strikeforce was independent of Zuffa, and it made a union for a co-promotion with M1 Global, hence the Fedor link, something that the UFC have rejected. Of course then Zuffa takes it over, and so that's also quite interesting, isn't it?